You'd think a man as rotund and routine-bound as Nero Wolfe wouldn't blink if a knock on the door came during the sacred hours of his orchid tending, which run from 9 to 11 and again from 4 to 6. But when it came during lunch hour, shared midday truce between orchids and observation, he blinked, and not in the metaphorical sense. I saw it. One blink, slow and deliberate, like a curtain drawn halfway in a theater just before the play takes a nosedive. I was mid-fork through my corned beef hash Fritz had given it a crisp that bordered on heroic, and Wolfe had just grunted his approval. When the doorbell buzzed once, then again, that was the first tick off normal. Fritz doesn't allow guests during lunch unless the house is on fire, or the collar threatens to become part of the furniture. I rose with my usual mix of curiosity and annoyance, more of the latter, if I'm honest. You don't interrupt Wolfe when he's halfway through chewing unless you have a very compelling reason. At the door stood a woman in her late 30s, the kind that's hard to place in any category beyond someone with a purpose. Blonde, lightly freckled, and wearing a dark green apron over a wool coat. Odd combination. Unless you're a butcher, a baker, or possibly a saboteur on break. "Is this the residence of Mr. Nero Wolfe?" she asked, her voice polite but clipped. "It is," I said. "And lunchtime," I added, hoping she'd catch the drift and come back in an hour with a box of pastries and a better sense of timing. But she didn't budge. "My name is Tamson Quayle. I have something he'll want to see." That's the kind of phrase that usually earns a raised eyebrow or at least a smirk from me. Instead, she reached into the folded waist of her apron and pulled out a folded cloth, red and white striped, like something you'd find in a vintage bakery. She handed it to me without further pitch. I unfolded it slowly. The center of the apron was stained with what looked like chocolate, but it wasn't chocolate. I've seen enough forensic films with Wolfe to know a spot of dried blood when I see one. "You'll want to bring this to him," she said. 10 minutes later, Wolfe sat behind his desk, glowering at the apron as if it had insulted his mother and knocked over his beer barrel. "Miss Quayle," he said at last, "I detest ambiguity. I detest intrusion more. You've managed both. Explain yourself." She stood stiff in front of his desk, not like someone pleading, but like someone filing a complaint with a notoriously grumpy but high-ranking official. "I manage a cooking studio in the West Village. Private classes, corporate groups. Last week, during a team-building session, one of our guests left this apron behind. Normally I'd toss it in the wash, but there was this." She motioned to the stain. It didn't feel like an accident. Something about how it was folded, hidden. Wolfe looked at her like she'd just declared an apron's emotional life. "Miss Quayle, if I accepted every domestic cloth stained with protein residue as a matter for deduction, I would drown in linens." I cleared my throat. "There's more, I think." She nodded. "2 nights ago, someone broke into the studio. Nothing taken, just rearranged. Drawers pulled out, cabinets opened. No forced entry. But they'd been there. I called the police. They shrugged. So I brought it here." Wolfe leaned back. "You believe this item?" He tapped the apron. "And this incursion are linked." "I'm sure of it," she said. "Miss Quayle, are you aware that I charge an obscene fee? I'm prepared to pay." He narrowed his eyes. That meant he was interested. But Wolfe being Wolfe, he wouldn't let her know that. Not yet. He turned to me. "Archie, take down her details. Then drive to this cooking studio. Observe. Do not taste anything, even if they're serving duck eel arrange." I quipped. He waved a hand as if brushing away my humor like a fly on a window pane. "Miss Quayle, I will consider your case. Archie will report. You will hear from us." She hesitated, then nodded, retrieving her coat like a soldier shouldering armor. She left the apron behind after the door closed. Wolfe stared at the striped cloth for a good 10 seconds. Then he muttered, almost to himself, "Blood, apron, and rearrangement. Curious." That was Wolfe speak, for this might be something, which meant my afternoon was shot. I'd be heading to a kitchen full of passive-aggressive chefs, half-burned, cookies, and secrets wrapped in pastry dough. And something told me, whatever had stained that apron, it wasn't spilled stew. When I returned from Miss Quayle's cooking studio, it was close to 6, and Fritz had begun clanking around in the kitchen with a quiet urgency. That meant dinner would be worth dressing for. I dumped my notebook and coat on my desk and headed straight for Wolfe's office, where the big man sat in his chair like a boulder that had decided thinking was better than eroding. He glanced up just long enough to note I was not a threat to his digestive clock. "She runs a tight ship," I said, dropping into my own chair. "Or kitchen, I guess. Stainless steel. Color-coded knives, name tags for everyone, even the clients. I don't know how people manage to commit crimes in places that clean." Wolfe didn't reply, so I continued. The apron came from their Monday team-building event. 10 participants. One of them left it behind. She's got a list of names and receipts. Corporate retreat, sponsored by a boutique advertising firm called Pearl and West. All 10 employees. No outsiders, no press, nobody's sure which one left. The apron. But Tamsin says the cubby was marked for a guy named Devin Tarelli, art director. Quiet type, showed up late, didn't participate much, left early. And here's the kicker, he hasn't responded to calls or emails since. Quayle says he was supposed to sign a waiver. Never did. Devin Tarelli, Wolfe murmured. Italian surname, New York born, Queens, according to her records. Age 33. Lives in Astoria. Nothing flashy on file. I dropped by his apartment before coming back. Mail piled up, lights off, nobody answered. His neighbors say they haven't seen him since Monday. They assumed he was on vacation. Wolfe grunted. And the disturbance, 3 days after the class. Someone slipped in and shuffled things around, didn't take anything, didn't break anything. But all the aprons were removed from the cubby shelf and put back in a different order. The only one that was missing was the red and white one. Wolfe reached forward and nudged the folded apron, which now rested on his desk like evidence waiting for the next act, a provocation, designed to make her notice. That's her theory, too. She says it felt intentional, like someone wanted her to find the stain and make something of it. And I think she's right, I said, She didn't just panic and run here. She clocked the break-in, matched it to the apron, and brought it to you instead. Other cops, which tells me she thinks someone in that kitchen knows what happened to Devin Tarelli, or she's involved herself and is feeding us piecemeal guilt. Could go either way. Wolfe steepled his fingers, and the others present at this culinary ritual. I've got a list. 3 execs, a junior copywriter, 2 account managers, a social media lead, and an HR rep. Plus Tarelli. The HR woman Lynette Rull is the one who booked the event. I spoke to her briefly. Said it was just a wellness initiative. Food, teamwork, and photos for the company's internal newsletter. She didn't remember anything unusual, except that Tarelli seemed withdrawn. Her word. Wolfe snorted. Withdrawn. A euphemism. Did she say why he might have been? Not in so many words. But she did mention there'd been tension in the office last quarter. Some reshuffling. A few people were let go. A few promotions. Wolfe closed his eyes, which is what he does when he wants you to think he's napping while he's quietly rearranging the pieces of your report in his mind like checkers on a board. He opened them again 5 seconds later. I dislike that the apron was removed from the cubby during a break-in, but returned before her discovery. It suggests a performance. You think someone staged it. I think someone is testing thresholds of attention, of suspicion, of response. He tapped the armrest twice, then said, "Have Saul Panzer find Devin Tarelli. If he's dead, I want to know where he lies. If he's alive, I want to know why he's hiding. Then summon Miss Quayle again. I wish to ask her about her culinary philosophy." That was Wolfe's version of a subpoena. By 7:30, Saul had been briefed and dispatched. By 8, Miss Quayle had returned, though this time without the apron. She took the same seat in front of Wolfe's desk and waited without fidgeting. "I have read your menu," Wolfe said without preamble. "You favor sour accent stamarind, vinegar, preserved lemon. Your desserts employ restraint. Less sugar, more zest." She blinked. "That's correct. I think food should be clear, balanced, surprising but never overwhelming." Wolfe nodded. "Do you cook for clients or merely instruct?" "I do both. I train staff, run classes, and consult with catering groups. But I also observe. I make sure no one injures themselves or others." That earned a glance from me. Wolfe, though, simply asked, "Was Mr. Tarelli injured during your event?" "No," she said, firmly. "He didn't participate. He just watched. He left halfway through. I thought maybe he was ill." "Did you speak to him?" "Only once. He asked where the knives were kept. I told him they were laid out in front of him." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "And afterward, you noticed his apron was missing?" "Yes." 2 days later. "Do you believe the stain is blood?" "I do." "And do you believe Devin Tarelli is dead?" She hesitated. "I think someone wants us to believe he is." Wolfe looked at me. "Archie, tomorrow you will visit Pearl and West. Interview each attendee. Do not let them know what you're looking for. Do not mention the apron. Understood?" "Miss Quayle, you may go." She nodded, then added, There's one more thing. During the class, one of the knives went missing. Not the largest, a paring knife. It turned up again in the wrong drawer. Clean. Wolfe closed his eyes. Now I'm annoyed. She left. Wolfe didn't say another word until Fritz called us to dinner, and even then, he only grumbled about the duck being slightly overdone, which it wasn't. But I could tell his appetite was beginning to drift towards something far more complex. By 10 the next morning, I was standing in the fluorescent purgatory of Pearl and West's reception area, watching a potted ficus tilt toward extinction and wondering if it was a metaphor. The walls were painted the kind of grey that begged not to be noticed, and the receptionist a lanky 20-something, with the enthusiasm of a tax form, glanced up long enough to inform me that Ms. Roll would be out shortly. She emerged 5 minutes later, all business in a tan blouse, black slacks, and heels that clicked like punctuation marks. "Mr. Goodwin, follow me." I did. Down a hallway lined with framed ad campaign posters that screamed irony in 30-point Helvetica. One for a vegan protein bar showed a bull crying. Another had a snake wrapped around a measuring tape. Whatever they sold it. With a wink and a shiv dot, we ended up in a conference room with a bowl of breath mints, a pitcher of cucumber water, and a window overlooking a brick wall. Roll sat across from me and folded her hands like a guidance counselor. "About to recommend boarding school. You said this is background research." "That's right," I said, pulling out my notebook. "We're building a profile. You hosted a cooking session Monday evening at the West Village Culinary Studio. Yes, 10 of us. From this office, no plus ones. I'd like to walk through the attendees. Just names and roles to start." She nodded. "Myself, Lynette. Rull HR and Wellness Coordinator. Amanda Loxley, our Executive Creative Director. Max Berriman, Senior Accounts Lead. Daniel Polk, Junior Copywriter. Priya Desai, Head of Digital Strategy. Bryce Eaton and Marsha Kintley, both account managers. Simone Colvetti, Analytics. Kenny Bloom from Media Partnerships. And Devon Tarelli, Art Director. Let's start with Devon. Any workplace tension?" She exhaled. Devon was quiet, talented, but increasingly withdrawn. Didn't socialize, missed a few meetings recently, and yes, there was a rumor that he was on his way out. Not fired, just mentally checked out. He'd been passed over for a campaign lead last quarter. Amanda took it instead. He didn't take it well. Did he make trouble? Nothing overt. But there were whispers. He thought Amanda undermined him. I made a note. How did Amanda get along with him? She's sharp, demanding, not always gentle. Devon didn't appreciate her style. I continued down the list. Amanda Loxley, age 39, with a portfolio full of award-winning ad campaigns and a reputation for hard-edged leadership. I'd interview her next. Max Berriman was in his early 40s, recently divorced, and reportedly saw the cooking class as HR nonsense. He apparently liked Devon fine, but found him melodramatic. Priya Desai ran the digital department and had clashed with Devon over aesthetics, which I found in ad world terms usually meant someone refused to use teal when another insisted. Bryce and Marcia were both junior grinders, middle of the pack. No known issues with Devon. Simone Colvetti, an introvert, didn't talk to anyone at the event. Kenny Bloom was new less than 2 months on the job, and may have been trying too hard to fit in. Each of them had a small possible stake, a pinched nerve here or there. But Wolfe would want depth, not gossip. So I asked Raoul if she'd arrange 10-minute one-on-ones for me in a spare office. She agreed daughter Amanda Loxley was up first. She strode in wearing an indigo pantsuit, and an expression like she'd already made up her mind about me. Devon was talented, but he didn't understand deadlines or pressure. This business doesn't hand out medals for moodiness. Did he resent your promotion? I asked. If he did, he didn't say it to my face, but I could tell. He had this way of going quiet when he didn't get his way. Then he'd make vague remarks in design meetings about watering down the vision. Did you notice anything off during the cooking class? He wasn't himself, or maybe he was too much himself. Said maybe 3 words all night. Then he asked Tamsin about the knives. I remember thinking it was a weird question. I let her go and called in Max Berriman. He slouched in the chair, like it owed him rent. Devon, A. Moody guy. Sensitive. Look, everyone has baggage. He's just had wheels. Anything stand out about that evening? He left early. Said he had a headache. I remember because Amanda muttered something under her breath after he walked out, which was something about how it'd be easier if he just quit already. Priya Desai followed, composed and clipped. Devon had strong opinions. Too strong, sometimes. We fought over layouts. He once scrapped a whole campaign board without asking me. I'm not saying he was a bad guy, but he had this intensity, like he was always on the edge of a line he didn't want to cross. And Monday, he barely cooked, didn't touch the ingredients, just watched. I figured maybe he was sick or hungover, but then he kept staring at the cubbies, like he'd lost something. Bryce, Marcia, and Simone were variations on the same theme, none close to Devon, no strong opinions, no major incidents. Marcia mentioned she saw him fidgeting with a paring knife before he left. He was wiping it with a cloth, not the standard one, red and white striped. I thought it was his own. I filed that Kenny Bloom, the last, was the only one who said something different. After class, I went back in for my phone. I heard someone moving around by the sinks. Thought it was Tamsin, but when I looked, nobody was there, except Devon's apron was missing from his hook. You're sure it was his? I saw him fold it earlier. He tucked something into the pocket. I didn't see what. That gave me enough. I thanked them all, dropped off a copy of my notes, with saw who still hadn't turned up Devon, and headed back to the brownstone. Wolfe listened to the whole account without comment, his eyes closed, arms folded. When I finished, he said, Archie, tomorrow you will revisit the studio. Bring Fritz. He will inspect the knives. Fritz. What for? To determine which have recently been honed. To judge balance, weight, and steel wear. I wish to know if a knife has been cleaned to well. To clean. Wolfe opened his eyes. Yes, cleanliness can be a kind of concealment. A blade to pristine speaks louder than one left honest. I wrote that down. Not because I didn't get it, but because I knew I'd need it later. Wolfe never wasted metaphors. At Wolfe's insistence, I picked up Fritz the next morning at precisely 9 o'clock. He wore his second-best coat, which told me he was taking the knife inspection personally. You don't ask Fritz Brenner to critique cutlery and expect half measures. He sat beside me in the front seat of the Heron sedan like a man headed to a funeral, where the deceased had once insulted his béarnaise. Tamarind, he muttered. What about it? I read the menu for the West Village Studio. They used tamarind reduction in a salmon glaze. Disgusting. I'll be sure to pass that along to Miss Quayle. She won't care. They're all chasing novelty. Vinegar dressed up as sophistication. We arrived at the studio a few minutes later. Tamsin met us at the door in jeans and a utility apron minus the stain. Her eyes flicked to Fritz and back to me. This is your assistant. He's my superior, I said. Where food's concerned, he's the law. She led us into the kitchen, which cleaned like a surgical theater. Stainless counters, magnetic knife strips, triple sinks. Everything smelled faintly of citrus and steel. The paring knives are here, she said, gesturing toward a block of tools ranged like a pageant lineup. All the blades are cleaned and sanitized after each session, but none are missing. Fritz stepped forward with the solemnity of a priest. He picked up one, examined the balance, turned it over in his palm, then another, and another. 10 minutes passed in silence as he examined each blade like a jeweler inspecting heirlooms. This one, he said at last, holding a small paring knife with a dark wooden handle. Too sharp. Recently honed. Not professionally. Tamsin frowned. I didn't sharpen it. And I'm the only one who maintains the block. Then someone returned it after modification. Fritz said, the bevel is uneven. It's been altered to appear untouched, but the edge is too precise. They cleaned it, but over-cleaned. I gave Tamsin a look. You said someone broke in and rearranged things. This knife could have been taken, used, and put back. You're sure nothing else is missing? She nodded. I ran a full inventory after the incident. Everything accounted for. Fritz returned the knife to the block with the same care he gives to caviar. Someone took this, cleaned it, honed it, and placed it precisely where it would not be noticed until now. I thanked her and escorted Fritz back out, knowing Wolfe would call it an intrusion disguised as tidiness. After dropping Fritz off, I decided to revisit Devin Torelli's apartment in Astoria. Saul hadn't reported back, and Wolfe didn't like dangling threads. I parked on a narrow street flanked by laundromats and bodegas, then climbed the stairs to Devin's third-floor walk-up. Still no answer. I knocked again. Silence. Then I noticed something odd, a faint smell. Not foul exactly, but sweet and stale. Like dried herbs and something else. I checked the door. Locked. But the window at the end of the hallway looked out over a fire escape that ran parallel to his. With no audience around, I climbed out and made the short traverse to Devin's window, which, conveniently, was slightly ajar. Inside, the place was dark, but not deserted. The living room had magazines piled neatly, a half-full bottle of mineral water on the table, and mail stacked with precision. Nothing screamed panic. But the kitchen counter told a different story. One drawer was pulled out too far, almost yanked. On the tile, a scrap of folded paper. I picked it up. A printed recipe for bittersweet gannock tart. Nothing strange until I turned it over. On the back, scribbled in black ink, "Tell her not to trust the one who calls himself honest." No name, no date, just the cryptic note. I searched the rest of the apartment. Closet, bathroom, bedroom. Clothes were in place. The hamper had a week's worth of laundry. Nothing packed, nothing staged, no passport on the desk. Either Devon had left in a hurry or someone had made it look like he had. I returned to the brownstone by mid-afternoon. Wolfe had finished with his orchids and was seated, reading a volume on medieval herb lore. He looked up as I walked in. "Fritz called," he said. He was appalled. So was the knife. I handed him the scrap from Devon's apartment. "Found this in the kitchen. No sign of forced entry. But that note, that's something." He read it once and handed it back. "Hyperbole, but perhaps accurate. You think someone staged his disappearance?" "I think someone wished him to disappear and left a breadcrumb. But it was a deliberate crumb. To deliberate, intended to suggest menace without clarity. He could still be alive, or not," Wolfe said. "Either way, he is not in control." He paused, then added, "Archie, bring Miss Quayle here again, and then contact each of the 9 remaining employees and schedule brief visits to the brownstone. I want to see their faces. I want to hear their lies in person." "You're going to interview them here?" "Yes, one by one. This kitchen crime has grown teeth." "I thought you hated having people here." "I do," he said, "which makes their presence significant." And that was Wolfe's version of locking the gates. The suspects were now his. If there's one thing Wolfe hates more than getting his hands dirty, it's having his territory disturbed. So you can imagine his mood when our office over the next 2 days turned into a parade ground for ad executives. Each of the 9 remaining participants from the cooking class was summoned, one by one, to the brownstone for what Wolfe charmingly referred to as brief exposure. That was his way of saying, "I want to watch them squirm in person." Amanda Loxley came first. She arrived exactly on time, dressed like she was headed to court flawless navy suit, shoes that cost more than my monthly tab at the steakhouse. She crossed her legs precisely and offered Wolfe a polite smile. "I appreciate the formality, Mr. Wolfe, but this feels like an odd use of resources. Devon is probably sulking in a lodge somewhere, licking his wounds." "You may be correct," Wolfe said without looking up. "Do you prefer your steak bloody or burned?" She blinked. "Medium rare." Fitting. That was all he gave her. The rest of the session was him watching while she floundered through innocuous questions I asked. How long she'd known Devon, how often they'd argued about design, whether she'd noticed anything strange that night in the kitchen. She said no, and not really. When she left, Wolfe muttered, "She lies by omission, but she does it well." Next came Kenny Bloom. Nervous, fidgety, eyes darting around like weed. Booby-trapped the walls. He repeated what he told me at the office, heard movement after the class. Saw Devon's apron was gone but added something new. Actually, when I went back in, I heard, like a click, metal on tile. Maybe someone dropped something. Why? Didn't you mention this before? I asked. I didn't think it mattered. I mean, it's a kitchen. Wolfe didn't speak, just stared until Kenny cracked under his own breath and left. That stare has wilted stronger men. Marcia Kintley came next, meek, soft-spoken, seemed genuinely baffled by the summons. She had nothing new to add, but she did mention that when the class ended, Devon had walked out without changing out of his apron. I just thought he forgot. That apron was stained, Wolfe said, and someone took pains to hide it later. Why? She didn't know. She looked shaken. He let her go. Priya Desai sat down and didn't even try to hide her irritation. This is ridiculous, she said, arms crossed. He was unstable. Everyone knew it. Maybe he finally snapped and disappeared. People do not vanish like balloons. Wolfe said they are pushed, pulled, or erased. Which was it? Priya exhaled sharply. You tell me. You're the genius. He didn't rise to the bait. He just said, we shall see. Each suspect brought something, even if it was nothing. Wolfe listens for absence, what they don't say, what they dodge, what they cover up with too much politeness or too little concern. By the time Lynette Roll, the HR rep, arrived last, Wolfe's mood had simmered into something icy. You booked the class, Wolfe said without preamble. I did. You approved the roster? Yes. Did you know Devon Tarelli was on the verge of quitting? She hesitated. There had been conversations. He was disengaged. Why bring him to a wellness event? To keep up appearances. And, frankly, because Amanda insisted. She said it would be good for him. Curious, Wolfe muttered. Thank you. After she left, I turned to him. What are you thinking? That someone wants us looking at Devon's state of mind, not their own actions. Planting a narrative, precisely, and they're doing it inside my house. Which brings me to the real disturbance. That evening, after dinner, Wolfe took his usual chair with a book and a brandy. I went to the office to write up my notes from the interviews. I was halfway through my transcript on Amanda's visit, when something caught my eye, barely a flicker, but enough. The desk drawer. It wasn't open, but it wasn't closed the way I left it either. I tugged it open fully and found the contents ever so slightly rearranged. I don't mean ransacked. I mean reordered. The notepad that usually sat on top was under my address book. A pen cap had been switched. A single file folder had been rotated 90 degrees. I checked the window. Locked. No sign of forced entry. I went straight to Wolfe. Someone was in the office, I said. He looked up from his brandy with a sigh. Are you certain, you? Know how I leave my drawer? No one touches that drawer except me. He frowned. What was disturbed? I told him. Then this is not merely a provocation. It is infiltration. Subtle, yes, but deliberate. Who? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the phone and dialed. Saul, I require surveillance. The studio. Begin tonight. covert. I'll pay overtime." He hung up and turned to me. "The suspect has grown bold. They wish to know what we know, or how close we are. They fear exposure." And the message in Devon's apartment. More deliberate misdirection. Someone is curating this like a performance, blood on an apron, a missing knife returned to. Clean, a note with riddles, now a rearranged drawer. They wish to control the narrative by planting ambiguity. Then what do? We counter the story with silence. No more visits. No more calls. Let them believe we've stalled. And then, Wolfe said, we bait the hook. That night, I stayed in the office until nearly 2 a.m., keeping watch. Nothing happened. But Wolfe was right, the intrusion wasn't random. It was the kind of trespass that's not about stealing, but seeing. They weren't just trying to stop us. They wanted to know how close we were to the truth. The next morning began with Fritz delivering my eggs with a look that said he knew something but wouldn't say it out loud. Fritz never comments on cases Wolfe forbids it, but when he's rattled, he communicates with temperature. The toast was cold. The coffee was hot to hot. That was Fritz speak for something's off. Wolfe had barely emerged from his orchid room when the doorbell rang. Not a buzz, an urgent, impatient ring that didn't care if we were alive, dead, or digesting. I answered it. Tamsin Quayle stood there with a pale face and a manila envelope clutched in both hands, like it might bite her. "Inside," I said, stepping aside. She followed me into the office, and before Wolfe could even grunt a greeting, she laid the envelope on his desk. "It came this morning," she said. "No return address. Just this." Wolfe raised an eyebrow and used the edge of a paper knife to slit the envelope open. Inside was a single photograph. He pulled it out, and I moved behind his chair to get a look. It was a photo of Devon Tar ELLI.alive. Barely. He was slumped in a metal chair, his wrists bound with kitchen twine. Behind him, the white tile wall of the culinary studio. His eyes were half shut. His face was bruised. A small paring knife, possibly the paring knife, was visible on the floor near his foot. The timestamp in the corner read, 2:14 a.m. last night. Tamsin's voice was quiet. Whoever sent this knew exactly where to hit. Wolfe didn't respond immediately. He studied the photo, then placed it on the blotter in front of him and adjusted it precisely centered, aligned. "You did not call the police?" he asked. "I came here first." "Why?" "Because the last time I did, they told me nothing was stolen and to file an insurance claim." "This isn't an insurance issue." Wolfe nodded once, a slow acknowledgement that she'd made the right move. Then he turned to me. "Archie, Saul." Now, I called Saul Panzer, who had been watching the studio overnight. His tone was brisk, but underneath was a tension I hadn't heard before. "I saw nothing," Saul said. "No one entered. No lights. I walked the perimeter at 2. Then again at 4. Clean. But the timestamp. I don't care what the timestamp says. No one went in or out while I was there, unless they teleported in through the air vents. It didn't happen during my watch." "Copy's fake?" I asked. "Or the location?" "Is staged," he said. It might not even be the real kitchen. That didn't sit well. Wolfe hated fabrications, and this was no longer a subtle rearrangement of drawers or a cryptic note. This was pressure, real pressure someone wanted. US to accelerate or to back off. I relayed everything to Wolfe, who, after a moment of silence, said, "Miss Quayle, you will return to your studio. Find an excuse to close it early today. Tell your staff you need to conduct safety checks. Ensure no one is present. After 6, then leave the back entrance unlocked. Archie will handle the rest." She blinked. "The rest? Yes," Wolfe said. "The performance is nearing its climax, and we must be the ones in control of the curtain." She left, still, shaken but steady enough to follow orders. When she was gone, Wolfe called Saul again and instructed him to recon the roof of the studio. "I want eyes from above. If anyone enters after dark, I want to know how. Next." He called Fred Durkin to check the fire exits and basement. Ori was brought into canvas building tenants nearby. Wolfe was building his net quietly, methodically, one thread at a time. Meanwhile, I drove out to the studio that afternoon under the pretense of helping Miss Quayle inspect the kitchen. She handed me a set of keys, showed me which drawer was recently cleaned again, and pointed to a new mark on the back. Pantry door, a faint scuff, like something metal had been dragged across it. She whispered, "That wasn't there yesterday." At 6, the place emptied. Tamsin left through the front. I stayed, tucked behind a stacked shelf in the dry goods pantry, waiting. Saul was on the roof, Fred in the alley, Ori stationed at the front. At 8:47 p.m. A sound. Not the front door. The rear. Someone slipped in, silent as a sigh. I stayed, hidden, holding my breath. Footsteps. Careful. Then the faint creak of a cabinet door. I eased forward, just enough to glimpse a figure hooded, gloved, moving with purpose. They went to the prep station, bent down, and retrieved something from behind the stack of trays. A flash of phone, a drive. Then they paused. They turned and walked to the cubby shelf, the same one where the aprons were kept. They removed one. Apron, the red and white striped one, or a duplicate. They folded it, stuffed it into their coat, and began to leave. I stepped out. "Don't move." The figure spun. I got a glimpse door, lean build. Male. He bolted for the rear. Fred was waiting. There was a scuffle, a chair overturned, a grunt, a crash. I ran out the back to find Fred pinning the guy to the alley floor. "You got him?" I called. Fred grunted. "He ain't going anywhere." We hauled him to his feet. The hood came off. It was Kenny Bloom. Of all people, the new hire, the overeager. "Go along." His nose was bleeding, and his expression was one of total disbelief, like he couldn't understand how we had gotten ahead of him. "You've made a mistake," he kept saying. "You don't know what this is." I was helping. I was trying to protect him. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe waited. We brought Kenny into the office and sat him down. He looked around like he was in a museum where every painting hated him. Wolfe gestured at the chair. "Doc." "I didn't hurt him," Kenny said. "I swear." Devin came to. Me. He wanted to disappear. Said he was scared. Said Amanda threatened him. She was going to destroy his rep in the industry. He didn't know who to trust. He gave me the apron, told me to keep it safe. That the stain would get people asking questions. Blood? I asked. Kenny hesitated. Chocolate gunnock and beet juice. He staged it. He wanted to create noise. He said it was the only way to make people notice what was happening behind the scenes. And the photo? Wolfe asked. I took it, 2 nights ago. He posed for it. He's not hurt. He's hiding. Where? Wolfe asked. Kenny looked at the floor. I promised I wouldn't tell. You no longer have the luxury of loyalty, Wolfe said. You infiltrated this house. You tampered with evidence. Speak. Kenny sighed. There's a storage unit out in Queens. He's been staying there. He has supplies, cash, burner phone. He planned to vanish for a few weeks. Let people stew. And the knife? Wolfe asked. I don't know. I swear. Devon didn't mention it. Wolfe dismissed him with emotion. Fred escorted him out. When the door closed, Wolfe said, We are not done. Kenny Bloom is a pawn. Devon is playing a long game. But the original manipulation, the reordering of items, the threat came from someone else. The note in Devon's kitchen, I said. Not written by Devon, Wolfe replied. It contradicts his plan. It warns of betrayal, but he trusted Kenny. Someone else entered that apartment and left that message, which means someone else wants Devon gone, and they're willing to let him stay gone. The pressure was rising. The stakes weren't just reputation or fear. Someone wanted the performance to end with no encore. Wolfe's next move was not a phone call, nor a request for further fieldwork, nor even a sarcastic remark about the intelligence of the average and executive. Instead, he asked Fritz to brew a second pot of coffee and called me into the office, where the curtains had been drawn and the air had thickened with the kind of silence that only precedes strategic deployment. We now proceed, Wolfe said, with positioning. Meaning I have sufficient variables, he replied, eyes narrowing. But I lack gravity. I must force the orbit. The actors must respond to me, not to their own staging. That was Wolfe's way of saying, time to stir the pot. He dictated 3 short messages, all phrased with neutral ambiguity, and directed me to send them individually to Amanda Loxley, Lynette Roll, and Priya Desai. Each message read, Your presence is required at the Brownstone tomorrow at noon. Do not inform the others. Come alone. There will be questions. I sent the notes via hand delivery. Wolfe didn't trust email for anything beyond grocery lists. That afternoon, I visited the Queen's storage unit Kenny Bloom had revealed the night before. Sure enough, tucked between 2 rusted containers and a vending machine that looked like it hadn't been restocked since the Bush administration, I found Unit 118 Devon Tyrelli's temporary sanctuary. I knocked once. No answer. Twice. Then the door creaked open. He looked worse than in the photo. Unshaven, hollow-eyed, wrapped in a hoodie like a turtle halfway out of its shell. I figured someone would come, he said. He didn't resist when I stepped inside. A cot, a camping lantern, a bag of pretzels, and a laptop sat open to a blank document. You want to explain the performance? I asked. He gave a tired smile. I wanted to see who'd flinch, who'd talk, who'd try to shut it down. By faking your own disappearance? No. By weaponizing the suspicion they already had. I just turned up the volume. You handed Kenny an apron with a fake blood stain, ganic and beet juice. Very dramatic. And the photo, his idea. He thought it would scare someone into reacting. Well, it did, I said. You might have been killed. I wasn't, and now I know. Know what? He didn't answer. I drove back, told Wolfe everything. He listened, unmoved, and only said, "Then we proceed." The next morning at 11:58, Amanda Loxley arrived. She was followed within 2 minutes by Lynette, and then Priya, each surprised to find the others. Here, each offering tight-lipped greetings. Wolfe made no comment as I guided them to the office. He was seated behind his desk, eyes closed, fingers steepled. When they were all present, he opened his eyes. "Ladies," he began, "we are near the end of a farce. It has involved stained aprons, rearranged cutlery, a missing designer, a staged photograph, and an office teetering on paranoia." Amanda leaned forward. "Where is Devon?" Wolfe didn't answer. Instead, he said, "What I find most interesting is that the true instigator of this mess has remained quiet, curating chaos while others danced. That ends now." Priya crossed her arms. "What are you implying?" "I imply nothing. I assert. One of you entered Mr. Tyrrelli's apartment after his staged exit and planted a note, a warning, meant not for Devon, but for us. You tampered with my office drawer. You watched, waited, and tried to steer perception. Your goal was not to find Devon but to bury him under suspicion." Lynette spoke up, voice trembling. "Why would we do that?" "Because Devon's vanishing gave you an opportunity," Wolfe replied, "to erase a liability. Not physically, perhaps, but professionally. If he never resurfaced, his accusations would never surface either." Amanda frowned. "What accusations?" Wolfe turned to me. "Archie." I retrieved a folder from a cabinet and opened it. Devon kept records, emails, voice memos, screenshots of messages exchanged over the last 4 months. He believed Amanda undermined him, that Priya manipulated data on campaign performance to shift credit, that Lynette covered it all under the guise of wellness. He never submitted it to HR, but he documented it thoroughly. Amanda's eyes narrowed. "This is ridiculous." Wolfe raised a hand. "What is ridiculous is the effort spent crafting suspicion around a man already unbalanced. A fake disappearance, yes, but a real threat followed. A planted note in his kitchen warning of someone who calls himself honest. That was not his writing. Then whose?" Priya snapped. "You tell me," Wolfe said, "or I'll tell the authorities what I now know. That you had motive, means, and access. All 3 of you. And one of you is about to be turned inside out." Silence. Then, unexpectedly, Lynette spoke. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Both Amanda and Priya turned to her in unison. She continued. "He came to me, said he had proof, said he was going to make everything public. The firings, the bonuses, the inflated numbers. He wanted me to go on record. I panicked. Wolfe said nothing. Lynette looked down. I went to his apartment. I found the folder. I wrote the note. I was trying to buy time. I thought if people believed he was gone, we could clean things up. Instead, Wolfe said, "You deepened the hole." Amanda stared at her, stunned. "You told me he vanished. You told me not to worry. I was trying to protect us." Priya stood. "I'm not part of this. I didn't know. You knew about the numbers," Devon's voice said from the hallway. They all turned. I'd brought him in through the back. Wolfe had anticipated this moment. Devon stood in the doorway, tired but steady, folder in hand. "You padded performance metrics for the client pitch. I saw the raw data. You pushed it." Amanda signed off. Amanda said nothing. Wolfe leaned back, pleased. "This concludes the performance." He looked at Devon. "Do you wish to press charges?" Devon hesitated. "Not yet, but I want the truth out. It will be," Wolfe said. "Now go home. Eat something, shower, and stay reachable." Devon left without another word. The three women sat in stunned silence. Then Wolfe waved his hand. "Mr. Goodwin will see you out." I escorted them one by one. No words were exchanged. Back in the office, Wolfe picked up the photo, the one that started it all, and slid it into a drawer. "Sometimes," he said, "the illusion is more powerful than the crime, especially when the illusion reveals what the crime only hints at." "And the apron?" I asked. "A symbol," he replied, "of what people pretend to be while hiding what they are." Fritz called us in for lunch. The roast was perfect. It was just after 10 the next morning when Wolfe instructed me to begin the calls. Not letters, not subtle invitations, direct phone calls. One by one, I dialed the numbers of all 9 remaining. Figures from the cooking studio, every person who'd sat in that gleaming kitchen with Devon Tarelli, the night of his vanishing act. The invitations were simple and identical. "Mr. Wolfe requests your presence today at 4 p.m. sharp at his residence. It is not optional." The use of "not optional" added just the right chill. Wolfe was no cop, no judge, no executioner, but he had a way of commanding attendance that outstripped all 3 by 3:45. The brownstone had been transformed. Fritz had cleared the dining table and set out neutral-toned chairs in a crescent before Wolfe's desk, not touching the carpet edges, an arrangement that Wolfe insisted promoted clarity and hierarchy. I watched him as he sat, motionless, awaiting the first rival, like a spider who already knew the size of the fly about to land in his web. By 3:58, the last of them had arrived. Amanda Loxley, arms folded, Priya Desai, wary and stiff. Lynette Roll, face unreadable. Max Berriman, chewing gum with exaggerated indifference. Simone Colvetti, silent as always. Kenny Bloom, freshly bruised and deeply nervous. Bryce Eaton and Marcia Kintley, eyes darting, hoping to remain furniture. And finally, Daniel Polk, the junior copywriter, who looked like someone had told him this was a dental appointment with public consequences. They sat, they shifted, they avoided each other's eyes. Wolfe didn't speak until the final minute ticked past 4. Then, with no ceremony, he began. "I will speak plainly," he said, voice slow and exact. "You were all present at an event that, on the surface, involved little more than smoked salmon and tamarind glaze. But that night, a performance began. An apron was marked with a false bloodstain. A knife was taken, cleaned, and returned. A man disappeared by choice. But the events that followed photographic threats, planted notes, and surveillance were not part of his plan. They were someone else's." He paused. "Devon Torelli is alive. That is not in dispute. What is in dispute is the role each of you played in what followed. The crimes committed here are not criminal in the strict sense, but moral, professional, reputational, and Mr. Torelli intends to expose them." Amanda shifted. "This is absurd. Devon ran off like a child who didn't get a cookie. He staged all of this to get attention. That was the first act," Wolfe said coldly. "But what followed that was not his." He pointed at Lynette. "You entered his apartment. You left a note that was not intended to help him, but to frame someone else." Lynette didn't deny it. She simply stared ahead. Wolfe turned to Kenny. "You infiltrated this house, tampered with our files, retrieved the apron. Not for protection, but to control the story." Kenny looked down. Then Wolfe turned to Priya. "You manipulated campaign data. Torelli had proof. You knew he'd begun to suspect. You feared his exposure would implicate Amanda." Priya opened her mouth, but Wolfe cut her off. "Save it." Then, to Amanda, "You used your position to suppress dissent. You targeted Torelli's reputation, undermined him internally. You spoke behind his back. You joked about his exit before he left." Amanda flared. "So what? That's not illegal. That's business." "No," Wolfe said. "That's cowardice, dressed as leadership." The room went still. Wolfe let the silence stretch like a rope. Then he continued. "The performance Devon staged a disappearance. A blood-stained apron was a desperate attempt to make himself heard. It succeeded because it flushed out your true behaviors. You did not conspire together. You conspired alone, and in doing so revealed yourselves as part of a single pattern, self-preservation at the expense of truth." Max Berriman raised a hand, half-heartedly. "I didn't do anything. I barely knew the guy." Wolfe nodded. "And yet, you told a colleague you hoped he'd just quit. That is not criminal. But it is telling." Marcia spoke softly. "I saw the knife. I saw him clean it. But I didn't say anything. I thought it was part of the class. It was part of the message," Wolfe said. "And your silence became part of the pattern." Daniel Polk leaned forward. "What now? You've made your accusations. What's the purpose here?" "The purpose," Wolfe said, "is reckoning. Mr. Torelli is meeting with the board of Pearl and West tomorrow. He will present his documentation. He will offer each of you the opportunity to respond. Some of you may lose your positions. Some of you may be demoted. Some of you may walk away untouched if unlikely." Simone finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "I should have said something. I saw him drop something behind the cabinet. I didn't know what it was. I just didn't want to get involved." "That," Wolfe said, is the most honest thing anyone here has said. Hero's a rare thing. But when Wolfe stands, it's not drama. It's declaration. You have been told. You have been seen. What happens now is up to you. He turned to me. Archie, you may show them out. I opened the door and waited. They filed out in near silence. No arguments. No raised voices. Just shame, confusion, and that collective post-performance lull. When the curtain drops and the actors realize the applause is not coming. When the door finally closed, I turned to Wolfe. Well, he settled back into his chair, poured the last inch of beer from a bottle, and took a sip. They will fracture, he said. Some will confess, some will spin. But the web has been revealed. Mr. Tarelli's truth will be heard not because he faked his death, but because their real selves arrived the moment they believed he was gone. I sat, letting that settle. That's your trick, isn't it? I said. You don't solve the case. You provoke the truth, of course, Wolfe said, setting down the glass. The truth is never hidden. It is merely waiting for the proper pressure. The office was quiet again. Fritz called from the hall. Dinner is ready. Wolfe nodded and rose once more. As we left the room, he said, Archie, remind me to dispose of that apron tomorrow. It no longer serves its purpose. And what was its purpose? To remind them, he said, that even a stain can be fabricated, but the guilt that follows it cannot. At 11 o'clock the next morning, Nero Wolfe was already seated in his office, a fresh bottle of brown ale by his elbow, and his eyes closed, not sleeping, but thinking, which in Wolfe's case meant letting the last threads of a web settle where they wanted, before he tugged them into a noose. I had finished typing up the transcripts of the previous day's group encounter and laid them neatly on the desk. He hadn't opened them. He didn't need to. Archie, he said, still not looking up, today we finalize. You've already figured out who left the note, who moved the knife, and who tried to bury Devon. I know who turned the performance into a plot, he said. I know who needed the noise, and who tried to silence it. And Devon, he will be here shortly, at 11:12 sharp. The doorbell rang. Fritz admitted Devon Tarelli, who stepped into the office looking more human than he had in days, clean-shaven, wearing a jacket that didn't look like it had slept in a storage locker. He looked at Wolfe with a tired gratitude that didn't quite reach confidence. You wanted to see me? He asked. Yes, Wolfe said. Take a seat. Devon sat. I have a question, Wolfe said. Not about the apron, or the knife, or even the storage unit. I want to know, what exactly were you trying to accomplish when you staged your exit? Devon hesitated. I needed people to talk. They weren't listening anymore. Amanda kept shutting me down. Priya was falsifying numbers. And Lynette was protecting the structure. I knew if I tried to report it, it'd get buried. So I made myself impossible to ignore. You succeeded, Wolfe said. But your vanishing also gave them room to act. Someone entered your apartment, left a note, made you appear more than missing threatened. I didn't ask for that. Devon said quickly. Kenny said it would add impact. I didn't want to scare anyone. Kenny, Wolfe repeated. Your accomplice, loyal, eager, and, unfortunately, simple. He followed your lead. But someone else took the initiative to exploit your absence. Devon's brow furrowed. Lynette? No. Wolfe said, Priya? No. Then, I will explain. At that moment, Wolfe pressed the buzzer by his chair. Fritz appeared silently. Please admit Miss Amanda Loxley. Amanda was shown in, impeccably dressed. Guarded as ever, she took a seat without being asked and didn't look at Devon. I assume you've brought me here for a conclusion, she said. Double quotes, yes. Wolfe replied, and to allow Mr. Tarelli to witness it. Witness what? Exactly. That your manipulation has failed. Wolfe said. Amanda crossed her legs and gave a humorless smile. Oh, because he's alive. No. Because you were clumsy. That landed. Wolfe continued. When Devon disappeared, you had an opportunity. You could have done nothing, but you chose action. You entered his apartment, planted a note, a vague threat pointing elsewhere. Then you waited. When that wasn't enough, you tampered with our office, my office, hoping to steer our attention toward Lynette. Your mistake was overconfidence. Amanda laughed once, dryly. You can't prove any of that. No, Wolfe said. Archie. I opened the drawer and took out the envelope. Inside was a second note found after our office was disturbed. The handwriting matched the kitchen note. Wolfe had sent both to a private analyst who owed him a favor. The conclusion was swift. Same hand, different intent. The first written with fear, the second with performance. This handwriting, I said, handing the report to Amanda, is yours. She took it, didn't read it, just held it in her lap. Wolfe leaned forward slightly by his standards, a full body lurch. You realized Devon was planning something. You saw him pull away. You feared he'd expose you. So you helped him vanish without his consent. You used Kenny's involvement as cover. And when that failed, you staged deeper evidence. You tried to turn a story about misconduct into a narrative of instability, because you knew once he came forward, you'd be done. Amanda still said nothing. Wolfe turned to Devon. Mr. Tarelli. She did not fear you. She feared your data. She feared the paper trail you kept. And in trying to bury it, she exposed her own footprints. Devon looked at her now, not with rage, but with something worse, understanding. You promoted me, then boxed me in, he said quietly. You told me I'd lead projects, then kept me out of meetings. You made sure I couldn't rise. Amanda's voice was cool. You weren't ready. No, Wolfe said. He wasn't pliable. That's what you mean. Silence. Then Wolfe delivered the final blow. I have prepared a report, he said, holding up a second folder, to be sent to the executive board at Pearl and West. It includes Devon's records, the timeline of events, and our findings including forensic handwriting analysis and a sworn statement from Kenny Bloom. Should you wish to avoid public scandal, I suggest you resign before it is sent. Amanda stood slowly. No protest, no rebuttal. You win, she said, looking at Devon. Enjoy the ashes, and she left. Wolfe turned to Devon. Now you have your voice. Devon nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me, Wolfe said. I dislike performances, especially bad ones. Yours was merely flawed. Hers was dangerous. Devon left, folder in hand. No need to hide any more. After the door closed, Wolfe sighed. I do hope she does not return, he said. Her perfume lingers like regret, too. Poetic for you, I said. He grunted. You really think this ends here? No, he replied. But it ends where it should, and for now, that is sufficient. You'd think a case like this would end with sirens, signatures, or someone sobbing in a hallway. But not in Wolfe's world. In Wolfe's world, when the curtain drops, it doesn't crash, it settles, soft as dust on a windowsill, which is exactly how it felt to days after Amanda Loxley left the brownstone without a backward glance. She didn't resign immediately. She waited 24 hours, made a single call to the executive board, and submitted a dry, PR-proof statement citing creative misalignment and emerging opportunities. I've read obituaries that sounded more hopeful. Her exit was quiet, but the ripples were not. By noon, 3 internal memos were circulating at Pearl and West. HR was holding one-on-one debriefs, and Priya Desai was seen leaving the building with a box of personal items and the dignity of someone who hadn't expected to be caught, but wasn't entirely surprised she was. Lynette Rull kept her job, though not for long. Wolfe predicted she'd step down within the quarter, and Wolfe doesn't make guesses. She'd been exposed not for criminality, but for weakness, for that bureaucratic flavor of self-preservation that companies can smell once it's no longer useful. Word from Saul was that she'd already applied for roles elsewhere. As for Devon Tarelli, he did the only thing that made sense. He came back, quietly, calmly, with a small press statement and a meeting with Pearl and West's oversight committee. They cleared his record, reinstated him in title, but not in role. He didn't ask for power, just the truth. And for once, the truth was enough. Wolfe refused to comment to any media outlets. Naturally, one journalist called twice and received a polite refusal the first time and dead air the second. Wolfe's contribution to public knowledge ended with the final folder handed off to Devon and a note instructing him to apply discretion. Where justice lacks teeth, on the morning after Amanda's resignation went live, Wolfe sat in his chair, yellow silk robe freshly pressed, sipping beer, and reading a volume of Thomas Aquinas. I was by the window, pretending to be busy while enjoying the rare peace that descends after Wolfe finishes dismantling a human scheme, you know, I said. I've seen some convoluted messes in my day, but this one wins for drama. I mean, a fake disappearance, blood made from dessert, a rigged knife, corporate betrayal hell. We even had an apron as a centerpiece. Wolfe didn't look up. A proper meal always begins with the mise en place. What is true for food is true for deception. You arrange your elements, you sharpen your blade, and then if you're clever you let others do the cooking. You saying Devon did all the work? No. I'm saying Amanda did. That made me laugh. Wolfe didn't. Devon gave her a match, he said. She lit the fire. The rest burned exactly as it should. What do you make of Kenny Bloom? I asked, a tool, not malicious, merely eager. He's been quiet since the fallout, still employed. Strangely temporary, Wolfe said. He'll leave soon. People like him do not thrive under scrutiny. Their usefulness ends when the stage lights dim. And Simone, she will be promoted. I blinked. She barely spoke. Exactly. Silence. When timed properly, sounds like wisdom. I let that once to dot by noon. Saul stopped by to drop off the final surveillance logs. Wolfe reviewed them without ceremony, nodded, and filed them away. "Mr. Panzer," Wolfe said, "you have my gratitude." "Then you have my invoice," Saul said, passing it across the desk. That night, dinner was roast pheasant with wild rice, and a reduction that made me consider retirement from sarcasm, just to savor it in peace. Fritz had been particularly expressive. In the kitchen since the resolution of the case, he didn't like clutter, culinary or otherwise. Amanda Loxley's manipulations had, in his mind, left a moral film on the flatware. After dinner, Wolfe returned to the office. He didn't read. He didn't sip beer. He simply sat. "You're thinking," I said. "I am considering." Big difference. Thinking implies effort. Consideration is effort well spent. "Well, while you're considering," I said, "I've got a question." He raised an eyebrow. "Why didn't you let the police take over once Devon was found?" "Because no crime was committed," Wolfe said. "At least not one the law would prosecute. The infractions were reputational, not legal. The only justice available was strategic." "You mean you had to outmaneuver her?" "Yes, you. Ever feel bad doing that?" "No." "Even when you see it coming and know how it ends?" "No." "Why not?" Wolfe leaned back. "Because, Archie, the truth is not a weapon, it is a mirror. If people stab themselves with it, I am not to blame." I sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "Dispose of the apron." I looked at him. "You sure? Kind of a souvenir." "Burn it," Wolfe said. "Fritz will supervise. Not even hang it in the kitchen. An apron is meant for honest labor. This one is tainted by theater. I will not dine under its memory." That was that. The next day, I took the apron folded, carefully, still stained with beet juice and cocoa, and placed it in a metal tray. Fritz lit the flame himself, silent as a priest at an altar. The fabric shriveled fast, and the stink was sharp, but brief, and just like that. The last remnant of the case was gone. By the end of the week, the brownstone had returned to normal. Wolfe's orchids flourished. Fritz's menus were elaborate and uninterrupted, and I, for once, had a clean desk. No blood, fake or otherwise. No suspects. Only the smell of blossoms and the echo of words that had once rearranged reputations like furniture. As I filed the last copy of the report in Wolfe's archive, I couldn't help but glance at the empty space where the apron had been. Wolfe was right. Stains may be fabricated, but guilt, that stuff sets deep. On the following Monday, the brownstone was restored to its usual state of equilibrium, silent, precise, and insulated from the meddlesome energy of the city outside. The phone barely rang. Fritz polished the silverware with unnecessary zeal. Wolfe resumed his reading regimen, alternating between monographs on medieval monastic herb use and a cookbook by a 17th-century French chef who apparently had opinions on lentils. That spanned 15 pages. For my part, I caught up on bills, correspondence, and pretending to organize files that hadn't been touched since the year Devon started at Pearl and West. Every now and then I caught Wolfe glancing at the empty spot on his bookshelf with a folder containing the case, notes used to sit. He had given that entire dossier handwriting analysis, timeline, witness transcripts to Devon personally, refusing even to keep a copy. Let him carry it. Wolfe had said, "The weight is his." We didn't speak of Amanda Loxley again. Not because Wolfe couldn't, but because he wouldn't. Her story, for all its cunning and consequences, was over. She had exited not just the firm, but the stage, swallowed by the anonymity of resignation letters and closed doors. The last we heard, she'd taken a sabbatical in Tuscany. A location chosen not for beauty, I imagine, but distance. Devon, however, visited once more unannounced, alone, and carrying nothing but a bottle of dry white wine and an honest expression. "I came to thank you," he said, standing in the doorway like he wasn't sure if he belonged. Wolfe, never a fan of spontaneous gratitude, simply replied, "It is not necessary, but I want to." Wolfe gestured to the chair, his version of a blessing. Devon sat. "I met with the board again this morning. Officially, I'm free to resume work, but I declined. I've decided to freelance." "Wise," Wolfe said. Devon smiled. "You'd think I was the villain from the way." They avoided eye contact. The ones who stayed behind. The ones who watched it all happen. Wolfe tapped his fingers together. "They were not your enemy, Mr. Tarelli, only your mirror." That quieted the room for a moment. Devon nodded slowly. "Kenny's working for a design firm in Brooklyn now. He called to apologize. He says he didn't know how far it would go." "He didn't," Wolfe replied, "but he followed someone who did." "And the apron, destroyed." Devon looked almost disappointed. "Good." Wolfe regarded him. "You began with artifice. That was your error. But it was their reaction that defined the truth. In attempting to control a false narrative, they exposed the real one." Devon stood. "I'll remember that. You will forget it," Wolfe said. "Then life will remind you." After he left, Wolfe turned to me. "That was not a case I would like repeated. Too much food involved, too much theater. We had a quiet dinner that evening, grilled halibut, lemon risotto, and sautéed spinach that tasted of garlic and peace." Wolfe made no mention of the apron, the studio, or Amanda's fatal mistake. Instead, he complimented the crispness of the fish skin, which from him was practically applause. Later, over brandy in the office, Wolfe leaned back in his chair and said, "We live in an age that prefers illusions to facts. Disappearance becomes message. Performance replaces testimony. You blaming Devon for that? No, I blame everyone." I poured myself a second glass. "Do you think they learned anything, Amanda? Priya? Lynette?" Wolfe shook his head. "No, but others did." "Like who?" He didn't answer. The office fell into one of those silences that doesn't ask to be filled. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, the air was thick with something final, not closure, but balance. Wolfe never sought justice in the legal sense. What he wanted, what he delivered, was exposure. Strip away the layers, remove the garnish, plate the truth, and let the consequences serve themselves. And in the end, that's exactly what he did. Another case closed, another stain scrubbed out, another. Full reminded that the sharpest knives are not the ones in your hand, but the ones across the table, asking questions,